And I think humility is really huge too, in terms of entrepreneurship, because you're going to get kicked down a number of times and you have to keep getting up.
Our featured speaker today is an independent management consultant, co-founder and director of Nuvia Building Solutions, an executive board member with Beacon Chain, and member of the Valhalla Angels, a private capital company. Abu, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for making time to share your journey with us.
Thanks for having me. It is my pleasure.
So I know you kind of talked us through a little bit of your backstory, but I was wondering if you could maybe more formally talk about your experience growing up and about some of the early life events, maybe some of the mentors you see that had a strong influence on who you became and where you wound up.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I grew up. I was born in West Africa in Nigeria, and my parents moved us to Saudi Arabia when I was 6 years old. So spent my formative years there. And I think very early on, I realized that my passion was entrepreneurship. I think at the age of 9 years old, 9 or 10, I started my first business. And, I saw an opportunity where it was scorching hot in the summers, getting up to 50 degrees Celsius. And at the end of the school days, all the cafeterias were closed, and all these kids were waiting for buses and parents to pick them up, and there was nothing for them to drink. So I went to my mother and I said, I'd like to buy little, box juices and freeze them overnight and put them in a cooler so that by the end of school, they'd be ice cold and I can sell them. Well, I'll tell you very quickly, I was selling out every day. Very soon, I expanded and started selling chips with it for the hungry kids. And eventually, I recruited my best friend to also buy, a flat of boxes of juice and freeze his. And we had quite the enterprise going until our principal shut us down. But moving on in later in life, I started looking for other opportunities. Very early on, I think mentorship came from my parents, who were very, very. They were academics, but were very keen on letting us explore ourselves in terms of our interests and different types of activities. I moved on to importing snake skins and exporting them to Turkey to friends of my parents of my friends. And as I grew up later on, one very key thing that I was taught was to seek mentorship. So early mentorship started with my parents during the university years. Through some of the jobs I had taken, I found some mentors who helped me develop specific skills in terms of people skills and also how to navigate different systems, be it legal or commercial. And down the road, I've had even more significant mentors who have led me to all the opportunities that I have right now. So I think that was a key thing, Nancy, you mentioned is mentorship, and I don't think I'd be where I am without some of those key mentors. I moved to Canada in my teens, started university at 16, and stayed here since then. And I've spent, about 25 years primarily living in Western Canada.
Thank you so much, Abu. I really appreciate you going through that with us. I find it so interesting what you've said about mentors and the impacts that they've had on you. If you don't mind, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that. In the one sense, how do you find someone that you feel would be a good mentor for you? And in another sense, how do you make sure you're also delivering value to a mentor?
I think mentorship is reciprocal. All the mentors that come to my mind, they the relationships were formed organically. We were either in a working relation, mostly I would say we were in a working relationship or through a working relationship where we both really appreciated each other's either passion, ambition, accomplishments or zeal and work ethic. And with that, you're naturally attracted to each other, and you form, let's say, an initial friendship. And I think the mentorship aspect, without having to define, this is what mentorship is, I really think the mentorship aspect grows organically, and it comes from two things: a person who's willing to help somebody that they feel is walking down a path similar to theirs, and then a person who's humble enough to ask for assistance and know that they don't know everything. And I think when those two things happen, you find really amazing mentorship. And in terms of adding value, that person gets value from seeing you being successful. That's really what they are looking for. And the true mentors, they still call me. One of my mentors just called me Canadian Thanksgiving. I hadn't talked to him for almost a year, but he has made an invaluable imprint on my life. And him and I will always touch base to see how things are going in life. And if either of us have, things to talk about, we just pick up the phone and continue where we left off. So I think it just you have to realize that this is the person I want to gain knowledge from. I love interacting with, and be humble enough to go out there and ask the questions. And I think the mentorship relationship happens organically.
That's such a great perspective. And I really appreciate the way you frame that question, Spencer, too, because it really is a two-way relationship. And clearly you've had value on both sides of that equation, Abu. So thank you so much for that. So I loved your story about how you had the entrepreneurial itch since like age 9. And whether you want to use that experience to reflect or just who you are now. I was wondering, in your opinion, what do you think are the most important character qualities an entrepreneur should possess?
I still believe I'm a work in progress. One thing I have done is surrounded myself with people who have accomplished things that I would have wanted to accomplish and maybe have since accomplished. And I think the qualities that I have seen and I have tried to replicate in myself are: number one, perseverance, resilience, creativity, and I think humility is really huge too, in terms of entrepreneurship, because you're going to get kicked down a number of times and you have to keep getting up. So you need to be humble and learn from your lessons. But at the end of the day, it comes back to that number one, which is resilience, always moving forward and not giving up. And I think around all of that, there has to be a passion for what you're doing. I have made the mistake in my career of pursuing things that I was not passionate about, but seemed to be economically viable or rewarding. And at the end of the day, whether they are or not, if you're not passionate about it, the harm or the work that you put in may outweigh the reward. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be creative, you want to create something that's groundbreaking, you have to be passionate about it.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest factors is persistence, and you're never ever going to get really persistent on something without having a passion in it. It's how you get that motivation where you don't, maybe you don't feel you have the energy or whatever, but because you're passionate, you can pull yourself up and do things. I think that passion is so necessary. And I understand where you're coming from when you say you've tried to work on something that you aren't passionate about, but that made economic sense. And it's just not nearly as easy to stay motivated and persistent in my experience. Now, you have a very varied portfolio of incredible companies that you've been part of. What led you to want to use your skills and experience to start a building company?
Serendipity and mentorship. You asked an important question, and I was involved in a different business that involved livestock, and one of the people that I brought on was the president of one of the animal associations here in Western Canada, and he became a mentor of mine. He was the previous CEO of a number of building companies that did structural steel and the fabric membrane buildings. And similar to what I had mentioned before, one day he just calls me and he says, "You want to book a ticket? Let's fly out. I want to show you something." And I was like, "Well, yeah, no problem. Where are we going?" He's like, "We're just flying to Vancouver. Book a ticket. We'll fly in and fly out the same day." And it was a Tuesday. We're going to fly out on a Thursday. And at this point, I had been part of the MIT boot camp. I had joined Valhalla and had traveled to a number of Central American countries through Canada as well, and had seen hundreds of pitches, invested in a number of businesses as an angel. And we flew to this company's headquarters in downtown Vancouver, and they went through the pitch. And I had never seen anything like this in my life. I had never seen the level of board of directors. I had never seen CEO founders who had that much experience and had built a number of very successful businesses in the past. And most importantly, I'd never seen a product that could really disrupt an industry that has not been disrupted in hundreds of years before. And immediately I jumped on board and invested initially in the parent company, and then we set up a licensing agreement to manufacture this technology. And it's become the fastest growing unicorn in Canadian history since then, over a span of 3 years. And it's been such a wonderful journey. But again, it comes back to having that mentor, being accessible and communicating. And that's how that all came about. So I had spent some time in industrial construction, but I was never a building technologies guy. But I love startups, I love disruption. And when I saw what this product could do and how it could change so many aspects of how humans live around the world, I was fully sold. And more importantly, I knew the team and the board could execute this at the level. And first customer was Starbucks. They saw the vision, and it's just been an amazing ride since then.
That's such an incredible story. So I want to just not exactly play devil's advocate a little bit, but we try to make this a space where it feels comfortable to talk about your victories and the not so sweet parts too. So given your experience, what did you find, to be the most kind of challenging stage? Was there any point that you kind of hit a wall, had to make some sort of pivot, and what did that teach you?
In my overall career, you're asking, or in this particular enterprise?
Yeah, more specifically to entrepreneurship. So, if you feel like there's a better example than this company and everything has been smooth sailing, then that's amazing.
No.
But but yeah, I was wondering because it seems like they've experienced rapid growth, which is amazing, but usually there's some difficulty there too.
Yeah. I think I'll answer your question in two parts. One, with this project, with rapid growth comes a lot of learning curves that need to also rapidly be met. And with that, finding talent, funding, you can only throw so much money at something when you're trying to innovate. At the end of the day, you have customers banging down your door wanting a product. You're trying to get production on the line, and you're also learning at the same time. I think the CEO said it best. He's like, we're building an airplane as we're flying it, and that's the reality that we've seen. And I think the biggest challenge there when you have rapid growth is making sure you're making the right decisions. And I think for the most part, those have been done. But when I break it down into little granular pieces of the struggles that we've had to go through over the last 3 years, I would say that there have been some challenges that we thought were insurmountable. Without going into detail for confidentiality reasons. when you're trying to build a product that needs municipal approvals, you have to go through different types of testing. It's totally new, it's novel. Sometimes you're trying to test something and it's so much stronger than anything that's been tested before, it ends up breaking the machine. So now the testing facility has to re-engineer a new machine to create a test. Like there's tremendous technical, financial, marketing, employee, shareholder challenges that you're going to go through. But the important thing is to have a team that's on board to ensure that you're going down the right path and to help guide you through it and to make sure that you're all persevering through it. The second part of it is, I think some of the challenges that I have had in my career have been, number one, one of the biggest setbacks that I have had after spending many years with a business is making sure that you are very carefully documenting relationships. You if you have any dependencies in terms of supply chain with other companies that you may have not developed that much of a long-term history with, you can get cheated, and we were. There were times where we got cheated and we basically lost our whole production line and our ability to supply to customers because there was circumvention where a company went right around us and started selling to our customers. So these are all challenges that you face in business, but at the end of the day, you get knocked down, you get up, you seek counsel, you seek legal counsel, you seek mentorship, you work with your team and keep persevering. But don't get me wrong, it's not all been rosy. There've been a lot of humps, and it seems like every time you see a clear lining, another one comes, and that's just the challenges of life.
Absolutely. It's definitely not a career path where things are all laid out for you and everything is exactly the same every day. I definitely understand that, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. One thing I did want to dig into a little bit more is the mission of building residential, commercial, and industrial properties in a sustainable and net zero manner, which is something that I think the whole world needs to be on board with if they aren't already. And I imagine the challenges can come not just from the technical perspective, but in your perspective, what is the most challenging aspect of making that vision a reality?
I think the biggest challenge that you have is getting local approval. Customers, when they see a building that is fire resistant or proof, size has amazing seismic tolerance, is water resistant, mold resistant, and has all of these attributes, that has walls that are stronger than concrete or even granite. Customers like it, they love it, and it's sustainable, it's green, it has no red listed ingredients in there. That's easy. But now when you approach a local municipality, and you try to get licensing to produce these buildings, now that's where you face some of the biggest challenges, because regardless of the test results that you have, regardless of the customer acceptance that you have, most of our bylaws and building codes are based on stick-built construction, for residential, potentially concrete or cinder block in parts of the world. And at the industrial level, you're looking at tilt-up, concrete construction. So it's very difficult to create a building, that, or a number of buildings, unless they're replicable. If you have replicable buildings, that's where you get the economies of scale, and that's where your business can really thrive. Now, if you're creating one-offs, which is most of the case in commercial, other than commercial retail units like the Starbucks and the drive-ins, the McDonald's of the world, that they're almost always the same everywhere you go. There's a lot of engineering cost that goes into building a building that is basically modular and prefabricated and can be put up in 2 or 3 days rather than months on end. So the costs are prohibitive to engineer initially, unless you get a large marquee client like that has replicable design. But then also getting municipal approvals, because if you have that design and you do it in New York, once you go to Los Angeles, you're going to have to apply again under building codes until you get an approved building that's federally approved. So some of those are the challenges that are being faced with sustainable buildings right now. Will they be overcome? We totally believe with the Biden administration right now, there is a lot of focus on green, and that is where the future is headed, at least in the United States. Europe is well ahead of most of North America already for regulation behind that and working on sustainability, so it becomes a lot easier. And then other countries in the world that are looking for very resilient homes can really expedite some of these approvals, because look at places like the Bahamas, where they're reconstructing every year after a hurricane. If we can deliver homes to them that are resistant to all of these natural disasters, in a heartbeat, they will be accepting them. And so we see huge demand. We see governments looking at this, knowing that if all the testing has been done and these are safe, looking at them for approval much sooner than what we've seen in the past. But those are some of the hurdles that we will likely face for the next few years.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining that. I mean, honestly, I think we could probably talk about green technology for this entire discussion. So I'm going to table some of that for a future discussion. And I'd actually like to pass to Arturo, who has a question for you.
Hey, Abu. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hey, great to hear you. One question is it's related to culture within startups. So how important have you learned culture is, and what role it plays in the building of a successful startup? What have been your major lessons regarding culture? And this is like a two-part question. And the other question is what things do you actively do to build a culture within your venture or startup?
Yeah, very good questions. I think the first part is how important is culture. I think that really depends. On the early stages of a startup, when you're I think culture is kind of a given, where you have a number of partners who choose to work together as whether co-founders or a development team. You mesh with the people you work with most of the time. Otherwise, as a startup, you pivot and you change some of those and move on. So I think it's less important at the early stages because a culture has not been established, a corporate culture. It's just a number of people working together. But as you grow, maybe after the first few raises and now you're building a team, I think that's where culture is very important, because you're working in a very stressful environment, especially if there's rapid growth. People are working 60, 70 hours a week. They can easily go find a job that pays them more for the hours that they're spending, and they need to feel fulfilled that they are, number one, achieving a purpose at the end of the day, that they believe in what the product or the service is doing, and number two, they need to feel that they will be part of the bigger picture of this down the road, and that they enjoy working with the people that they are working with. So that's where culture development starts becoming crucial. And I think that gets overlooked a lot by startups at the fast acceleration phase. And you need to have somebody who is very seasoned in building cultures. And I believe that, once you get a few raises underway, that's where you bring in a HR professional to work with the leadership and help them create a culture. Because at the end of the day, leadership is the one that actually moves the culture through. but they do need some assistance to do it. So I think that was the second part of your question, is how do you build that culture, right, Arturo? And I think that has to be a conscious effort where leadership says, this is the type of place that I want to create for people to come and work. If they're spending most of their lives working over here, working, I need to create a culture where this and this and this and this, and they need to define that. Have whether you call it, a mission statement or a mantra, whichever way you want to look at it, and work towards that, live it, breathe it, and make that be the North Star that guides them.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Abu. That's very insightful and very helpful.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much for that answer, Abu. I think that was really, really great. And I think it's interesting what you said about at the very beginning of a startup, a culture isn't that important, not because it doesn't have an impact, but because you'll very quickly know if it's not going to work. Things will change. And I think that's such an intelligently thought out point, and I really appreciate that. Now, Andrew has some questions.
Hey Abu, good to have you on this. Have you had experience, I would say, for lack of a better word, run-ins with government in terms of really exceeding the requirements? Because the current codes and zoning and stuff like that all specify minimum standards versus LEED and Green Building Council and others are exceeding these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for the most part, that is the case. The difficulty is when you're doing rapid, large scale construction. Most municipalities have what they call alternative building standards. That's where, a lot of LEED certified passive home, which a lot of ours are at passive homes specification, can meet. The difficulty is now you have to have somebody on your team who's going down there each and every time applying for an alternative building standards permit, even though you're exceeding all the requirements in there. And what they need to do is, because you're not building the same way as what those standards were made for, you have to prove how you exceed or meet each and every one of them. And when you're doing hundreds of buildings in many municipalities, that's where the challenges become difficult, until we get to a point where there is a recognized green building standard that says this material, this material, this material, if it passes this and this and this on a federal level, you can go ahead and apply for building permits without having to prove all of those things.
So thanks for that. So has there been any consideration in regards to some sort of fast track, like for example, in our case with smart cities, we've worked with the government to come up with a right of way agreement that would potentially fast track smart city projects. So similarly, I wonder in your case if there's a way to, engage with government to fast track, have some sort of agreement based on predetermined standards you've already started to perhaps fast track stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that those are conversations that have been had, and we're already having a lot of success here in Canada on the commercial and industrial building standards. So we are getting fast track. I think some of the building permits have come out almost at par with a regular building permit. But it did take some initial education on the first few ones that we had applied for. So it's just a matter of working with them and them seeing the vision and supporting it. But definitely those are options that are available, and as a greater team is being pursued both in Canada, the US, and currently as well in Europe.
Thanks so much for explaining that. Did you feel
Yes,
did that answer
yes, it did.
your
I'm excited
your
to
questions,
see where
Andrew?
this
Before
goes.
I
Thank you.
hop in. Yeah, me too. And thanks so much for the question, Andrew. If you don't mind me adding on to that a little bit, Abu, I've been more aware of some of the barriers to building at like the city council level in the US. And I was wondering, maybe even just from a commercial perspective, are you conscious of some of the differences between building in the US and building in Canada? And if so, is Nuvi or its partners making an effort to attract more builders to
Yeah,
Canada?
at Nuvi,
I was just sort of
we
wondering if
currently
you could talk about
have
that.
more work that we can handle, and we're in the process of setting up a manufacturing facility here in Alberta. Um, without, there's only so much I can share, so I have to be very careful in answering commercial questions here specific to our enterprise. But um, we have been able to, like, there's been tremendous amount of interest. The biggest issue we're having right now is just keeping up with the level of interest and being very selective of our clientele. Some of the buildings, like the Marriott, is close to being completed in Nanaimo. Starbucks, more stores are going up. So we're trying to really hone in on the type of buildings that make the most economical sense, have the best partnerships, and in terms of builders, Nuvi, we do have a sister company that is putting up buildings right now, working on those ones that I had mentioned, and we do the erection and the completion of the buildings. So I don't think attraction has been an issue. This business has grown much faster than any of us ever imagined. The biggest issue right now is bringing on more production online. So building facilities and the supply chain issues with getting our equipment online and getting them to the factory, dealing with steel and things of that sort.
Thank you so much for digging so deep into that for us. I do want to change our focus a little bit because I feel like Beacon Chain is a very interesting solution that you've been working on. Can you talk a little bit about the motivation behind the concept and how it works?
Yeah, yeah. Beacon Chain. Basically, it's the motivation started with me. I had invested some funds into. Well, let me go back. I'm passionate about bison meat. As a workout enthusiast, when I looked at the health content, and I love red meat, I looked at the health content of bison and looked at the nutritional profile being very similar to salmon. We invested some money in raising bison. Um, and then very quickly spending more time on cattle ranches and other livestock like bison and elk, I realized that that was also an industry that had not been disrupted for a very long time. And, ranchers had a lot of things that they needed. Understanding when their animals were ready for calving, artificial insemination, understanding when animals were going off bounds into dangerous territory where there's wolves or coyotes. So really putting data behind animal behavior. And we went down that path where we worked with Purdue University out in Lafayette, Indiana, and we had a partner in the U.S. as well as in the U.K. And we designed these tags that would go on the ears of cows or other livestock, large livestock, and it would measure a number of things. The gyroscopes and in there, and we'd use artificial intelligence to understand herd and individual animal behavior. So it was a very exciting business. Now the issue was COVID hit, and naturally the prices of livestock went down the drain. Restaurants had closed. There was very little demand for higher end meats. The price of cattle, bison, elk all plummeted, and it didn't make and is not recovered since. So, and it didn't make economic sense for ranchers out in the open to spend the level of money on monitoring per head that they were before. It was cheaper to hire labor. It's a different story for dairy farms, and I think there's still a market for dairy farms. So those are some of the challenges we faced since COVID, and we're still trying to figure out how to recover from that.
Yeah, that's really, Arturo said, that's very interesting about, and it really is. Thank you for that unique example. I love how your, personal passion for health kind of took you down that journey. And honestly, it's kind of making me think of something we do ask people frequently during these interviews, which is, you're a person of such varied interests and skills. Is there a problem that you would like to use
That
your
is a
knowledge and passion to
fantastic question,
solve that you
Nancy.
haven't delved into yet?
And I keep asking myself that all the time: is there a problem out there that I am very passionate about that I would like to solve? Um, and I stopped angel investing once we started working with Nexi about 3 years ago in 2019. I have not written any other checks. I've been focused on this, and I keep telling myself that in the number of years, I will probably have an itch to start a whole new enterprise. And right now, there's a lot of problems out there that I think could be solved, but I haven't pinpointed one that gives me enough of a fire and passion to go out there to build and solve. Right now, I think sustainable housing is a huge one, and before doing that, we probably have to do the multifamily housing, work on the commercial and industrial, because that is just the low hanging fruit. The residential becomes very, very difficult, and we will eventually crack that egg. So I think that's the problem I'm trying to solve at the moment, and I'm laser focused on that.
Thank you so much. I think it's so interesting to hear about the different ways that we focus and where your focus is at the moment. I really do appreciate that. Now, you went to one of the boot camps. Can you tell me a little bit about what motivated you to choose to go to one of the boot camps, and if there were any tools or experiences or people you met who particularly contributed to your journey since then?
Oh, I think that boot camp changed my life. I had been kind of going along with a number of businesses, flipping houses. I owned a proprietary trading floor where we traded day traded stocks on Nasdaq, New York, and Nikkei. So I'd been in a lot of different businesses throughout my years, and I was successful in some and failed at a lot more. And at that point, I had just started working with the bison business and trying to figure out how to really innovate. And I think that was the key thing that I was missing, is understanding that there are defined steps to innovation. And that boot camp and the mentors that we had there and the facilitators, it changed my life. It put a whole new trajectory on my life. I had never, I think I had not even looked at working with other startups in the past. That was not something I was interested in. I didn't even understand how like there was a startup culture well enough until I went to the boot camp. And I think in that short period of time, seeing the passion of other entrepreneurs, understanding that there is a defined way of building entrepreneurship, that mindset, that you could follow steps if you had the passion within you. There is a guide that you can actually follow. There's mentorship available. There's similar people who you could you feel you share energy with. I think it set me in the right trajectory for sure, and has changed my life significantly since then. So if anybody has an entrepreneurial mindset and is looking for more directed ways to grow that, I think it's the best program I have ever been in.
Well, thank you for that amazing review of your experience. And some of us have found that, as you have, that has just continued as we've met more people who've gone through this program that feel like-minded. And Founders Voyage is kind of an expansion of that group, inviting our like-minded friends and coworkers too. So we look forward to you continuing that journey with us too. So before we let you go shovel yourself out, I did want to hit you with one more question. I was wondering if you wanted to leave us with some words of wisdom today. This could be a takeaway from an experience or life lesson. It could be a mantra or something someone said to you. You can make it as long or short as you like.
Yeah, no, I think there's two things that I'd like to leave you with is, one of my mentors, somebody I value so much in my life. He's been outstanding. One of the things he told me, when I was younger, was if you want to be successful, write 3 things down every day that are important for you to accomplish and get them done. So I think that's, that level of granularity helps you get things done. So that's one thing that I will always share. The second thing that I have always lived behind is ignore unsolicited advice. If you're not asking for advice and people just come and give it to you, they don't understand context. I usually ignore it and I'll listen to it and I'll kind of file it in the right place, but don't let people's unsolicited advice keep you down. And number 3, I think is the most important is, life is so short. Pursue your passions, and there is a huge sea of people who will support you through those passions, who have similar passions as you do, and who will become your tribe. And I think I found that through some of the connections I made in the bootcamp program, and also through following that, using some of the skills I had learned and understanding that there are people out there like me building a community around me. So pursue your passions, find your tribe, and go out there and solve a problem that's happening in the world. You only live once. Make the most of it, and you're not going to be there alone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. I really appreciate it. I do want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us all today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you also to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate everyone bringing their perspective and energy to today's discussion. Nancy and I and the team behind Founders Voyage feel fortunate to be a part of bringing this community and these discussions every week. We would love to have you join us again next week or in future.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day, morning, evening ahead, wherever you are.
Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
This has been Nancy and Spencer on Founders Voyage Weekly Podcast. Our speaker each week can be reached through our Discord server. Our intro and outro music is from the song Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band. We'll be back again next week for another episode. Until then, have a great day and continue your voyage.